Now, the final thing that I want to talk about, which is less reactive. So body cameras allow us to take a look at what happened after something occurred, after the incident. Ending qualified immunity gives us tools after something happens. If somebody, let's fast forward or let's rewind with George Floyd's case, and let's say we didn't have qualified immunity, so they could just sue all these guys civilly for anything, and they actually ended up killing George Floyd. The end of qualified immunity would not have prevented that from happening. They would have killed him anyways. So how do we prevent these murderous cops, these guys who want to cough on people in their cars when they're writing tickets and giving them the coronavirus so they take it over to their wedding party? How do we deal with those protesters who are sort of instigating, recreating George Floyd's death, screaming at protesters? This guy's a law enforcement officer at a prison complex. How did he ever get hired there? Why is he of this mindset? Why is he of this disposition? Why is he doing those things? Maybe it's time for us to consider something that really nobody wants to talk about, and it is mental health with these law enforcement people. This is something that I think is a big issue, something that I would like to see some major reforms discussed moving forward. And here's specifically what I'm talking about. So not training. We're not talking about training, not sensitivity training, not de-escalation training, not racial sensitivity stuff. None of this coffee with a cop, like let's go have coffee and talk about things. Community listening, all of those things are fine. But those are all kind of band-aids on the problem. The real problem is, why are men and women who are just predisposed to hurting people and breaking things, why are they ever allowed on the force? Why are they ever brought in to our criminal justice system to begin with? There's just a certain group of people who we should never give a monopoly on power. We should never say you have the ability to go do whatever you want as long as you're doing it under the guise of a badge and a gun. On top of that, we're going to give you the whole monopoly, but we're also going to prevent you from having any actual liability for any of the harms that you do. Those two restrictions, unlimited power and absolutely no repercussions, are going to call a certain portion of humanity, just like people are called to be teachers or stay-at-home moms or lawyers or doctors. There's a certain allure from law enforcement that draws people who want that. They want that power. They want no repercussions. And we see it. You have probably seen it. When's the last time you were stopped by a police officer or any interaction you've had with law enforcement and you're like, man, that was a really pleasant experience. What a professional. It's very rare for me to do that. Cops are very high strung. I've been pulled over. I deal with cops on a regular basis. Now they tend not to like me or the things that we do. But generally speaking, most people I speak with, they never have good interactions with cops because it's a personality thing. It's a culture thing. They're drawing people in who want to break things and kill people, and they're ingraining them into this culture that is now, perpetuating the cycle. They get into the club, they got to do it because everybody else in the club is doing it. So how do we just put a hard line in there and pull these people out? How do we prevent them from ever getting on to the force? This is not Iraq. This is not Afghanistan. These are civilian streets. We're dealing with drug problems and speeding tickets. We are dealing with these things, but law enforcement is not. The men and women of the New York NYPD, LAPD, Arizona, Phoenix Police, Scottsdale Police, their job is not to go out there and prevent Osama bin Laden from blowing up the buildings. They are here as a civilian peacekeeping force. They should be treated as such. And those people that have mental health problems should never be allowed to make it to the force. They just should not. So how do we do that? What does that look like? What does the structure look like? So instead of the de-escalation, the sensitivity training, be nicer to minorities or whatever they do with these things, keep those if you want them. But how about we just get rid of the people who are problematic? Let's make sure that they do not make it onto the force. So the same way that you do a deep dive on other professionals, we need to start doing those with our law enforcement agencies. And I'm talking specifically about personality profiles, psychosexual evaluations, clinical narcissism. Are these people narcissists? Are they sociopaths? Are they psychopaths? There are classifications and there's ways to categorize these people. You go into the DSM-5, I think is what psychiatrists use. They have criteria for these things. If you do this, this, and this, and this, and this, you might be a psychopath. Are we even asking these questions of some of these cops? I think you kind of have to be a psychopath to put your knee on somebody's neck for 9 minutes and watch them expire right in front of you while people are literally telling you he's dying. Something has to be off there. So why was this guy, and I know Derek Chauvin, the cop who killed George Floyd, I know he had a long history of other complaints. Many of them don't seem like they were sustained, but he had a bunch of them. So why does he have these problems? What is he doing on the force? What if we just said, we're gonna evaluate these people for clinical narcissism, clinical psychopathy, sociopathy, and we're going to do it from a clinical perspective, from the civilian side. So, how do they handle these tense situations? How do they respond to anger? From a civilian side, if the same conversation that I would go have with my psychiatrist or my psychologist or my counselor or my doctor or whomever, and say, this is how I'm responding to these things. How can you help me? How can you give me the tools to improve that? Here, what we're doing is we're just saying, here's how we handle tense situations, not from a civilian perspective, but from a law enforcement perspective. If people are coming at you, here's how you respond. If somebody's doing something, here's how you respond. And it's all from a law enforcement. We're under attack. We're in the middle of, of an armed conflict type of mentality. Let's review it from a civilian mentality. Let's change that paradigm a little bit. We can also identify some of their underlying prejudices. So in a previous segment, I talked about specifically the cop who had a problem with Mennonites. His brother had a problem with Mennonites. Maybe somebody should have asked them if they have a problem with certain segments of the population. On a scale of 0 to 10, how much do you dislike Mennonites? And they could have said, I don't at all. But you would say, yeah, but you hesitated there. So is it a 0 or a 1 or is it a 10? And you can investigate that. You can say, yeah, we're gonna go in and investigate that. Now that of course presumes that these people are going to be honest, but there are ways that counselors and psychiatrists and people can create tests that make it hard to kind of fib the results. So we're going to do more mental health screening. The people who are lunatics should never make it onto the force. The people who are 22, 23 years old, who don't have any other job prospects, who have nothing else, they don't want to join the military, they want to stay here, they want to become a cop. If they're out looking for adrenaline, if they're out looking to punch somebody in the face and get rowdy, that's not what we want on the force. That's not the person. They can go join the military, they can go join a Brazilian jiu-jitsu class, and they can beat somebody up on the mats, but they're not allowed to have a badge and a gun. Specifically, what are their prejudices with particular demographics? I talked about the Mennonites, but what about other people? Men, women, blacks, whites, Asians, rich, poor. Are they going to pull over the guy with the red Lamborghini because they have a problem with rich people? Or do they have a bigger problem with African-American people? So they're just going to patrol those people. We have statistics, we have data, we can see where the anomalies lie. If one cop has 80% stops, he's a white cop, he's got 80% stops on African-American people or Hispanic people, should we know that? Can we just have a little chart and we can say, man, most cops, they're kind of even. They got 30% white, 30% Hispanic, and 20% African-American. Yeah, that's roughly the demographics of our state. That's roughly the demographics of this officer's particular patrol area. So that sounds about right. But we have that one cop who's got an 80% African-American stop rate. Why is that? Maybe we should just review that data, call that cop out, and say, hey, lunatic, what are you doing? Why are you stopping all of these black people? What's the deal? Is that happening? I don't know. Or are you prohibited from even having that conversation? Are the unions making it so that this type of data is not available? Do they want to protect their officers from having these conversations? But maybe that's a good place to start. Any one of these cops who is going through a psychosexual, psychoevaluation, a mental health screening, or any one of those things, if they fail, they don't get a job. They don't work in law enforcement. We have strict standards. You have to be a sane, rational, people-loving, freedom-loving, justice-promoting person to come work at our agency. We don't care if you fail the standards, you don't get a job. And if you're even questionable, they're kind of questionable. We give them a desk job. We don't give them a gun and a badge. That's it. Until we can learn a little bit more about how they're going to conduct themselves on the streets, they can sit behind in a probationary period. We can vet their work. They can do some follow-up examination. Then they can become cops. And look, certainly this is not going to be something that any of them want to do. I get it, but it's part of what's necessary because you've made it necessary. Your actions, your activities have made this necessary. You all hide behind the blue shield. You all protect one another. And so now it's time for the civilians to come in and say, hey guys, we're not in the middle of a war. You still have fundamental constitutional rights here on our soil that you need to abide by. And until you can show us that you can act like big boys and be adults, you're going to have to be monitored. You're going to have to be looked at because your agencies are not working. And it starts with mental health. This is proactive. This is probably a 20-year thing. 20 years from now, we'll see some results if we start implementing that now, because all the bad seeds are going to be thrown off the force, and all the new recruits, the people who are coming up, will say, yes, we're going to take this burden. We're going to go into law enforcement, and we're going to restore faith. I don't know what that's going to look like yet, but it's going to require some mental health screening. We're going to get past the screening. We're going to say, yes, we're not psychos. We are not racists. And we're just going to go out there and uphold the law. We're going to do it in a lawful, orderly fashion. After years of that, after purging some of the police from some of the bad police from the ranks, maybe we'll see some meaningful change. But it starts with mental health. We have to stay focused on that because a lot of these cops have no business whatsoever being behind a badge and a gun.